there just wasn't a place where producers were talking like this that wasn't over a ton of wine off mic with me. And I was just like, why doesn't this exist? Because when I came up, I didn't know the pathways, and now there's less. I mean, there's more access to understanding the pathways, but I didn't know the myriad of things you could do to get on the producer's path. And then I started to resent the idea that people would look to me when I had just begun my career, thinking I had figured it all out, and come to me for advice. And I'm like, I'm still, yeah, I don't even know what I'm doing. You know what I mean? And so, and this idea that producers are like walking red carpets and rolling in dough and just like clinking champagne glasses everywhere they go, which is very entouragey, and I think was
nice myth. Gets people into the business.
It gets people in the business, but the reality of what it means to do this work and walk this path. I've always been sort of obsessed with process and the behind the scenes of anything. I used to love just watching like how baseballs are made. I find that fascinating. So because of that, I really wanted to deconstruct like what it means to be a producer within the umbrella of producing. There's so many different types and the realities and the real, the stuff that like a lot of panels can skip over sometimes because we don't like to talk about the hard. And definitely in these last few years, I think more people are talking about the hard, right? And the realities of it. But I'm obsessed with how anyone gets through it and why anyone stays the course nowadays too, with how crazy the industry has gotten and how unsustainable it has gotten for producers and for anyone really that hasn't been here since the 90s.
You're singing my song.
So we're singing your song, and so I'm excited to talk to you and just be able to have this moment. It's a huge honor to be in
I'm thrilled.
community.
I mean, and also I just commend, like, to me, like, where I started going into a similar vein was also because I realized my director producer relationships were not all that I thought they could be. And some of that was because director producer relationships are often like a shotgun wedding, right? You meet somebody, right? And then you're saying, like, let's get married for at least 5 years. Right. And it's like, you don't know me. And that led me to write my book.
Yeah.
And to write my book, I started a newsletter.
Yep.
And I think that everything we as producers can do to help other people understand us better, solve some problems in the long run. Not that everyone's going to do their homework. I give my book to directors when I'm going to work with them. I don't think they all read it. Financiers, I give them my book. I don't think they're going to read it. But at least it's all there, so you actually know me. And some of my behavior is pretty predictable, right? And how I react to things. And I think that just like starting the podcast, hearing from other people, all those things provide a huge benefit because people can like, let me hear how this person talks and handles situations.
Yeah.
Because it comes down to exactly what you were starting to say. It's like, I realized 30 to 40 years in that I needed to have had some guidance in how to develop a creative professional practice. How to make it sustainable, how to make it generative. There were methods that we could use that would help improve that. I needed to have conversation and support to understand how to keep on keeping on, right? Like our job is to get a lot of doors slammed in our faces. Proverbial as they may be, they still hurt, And I've never found anything that works better as an antidote than collaboration, than knowing how other producers feel and handle that, to have like a team of support. Like often I think through like, what is the best advice you could give to somebody right off the bat? Build teams, I think it is. Build teams. Find those people that you think you can be with together. You can have multiple ones, right? It's not like a marriage that way. You can have those that you work with here, those that you work with there. I'm beginning probably my 8th or 9th collaboration with Christine Vachon over like 30 years.
Yeah.
She has a business partner. I had a business partner. I have a business partner now, my wife, but like she and I have our own little thing that we keep on doing. And you have to find those things, not just for the camaraderie and the expertise and the elevation that those works give us, but also I think you need them to deliver what the industry demands as a cadence of output. I'm a firm believer that most jobs aren't based on the job you're doing, but on the fear that your next one is even better. And the only way you develop that sort of expectation is by supplying a regular cadence of output, and good luck doing that on your own. That's like bringing, minimum, I would say, 4 new projects to market a year.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Well, and I was going to ask you that because there was a podcast I listened to where you talk about having at least 15 things in rotation at any given time. And I think you've obviously been in it for a long time, and you started, from what I read, is that you had a stint as the first AD and you line producer, and you sort of did all these things before you became PA, before you became capital P producer. But when I hear that, like juggling 15 things, it gives me so much anxiety because I have like 4 or 5 things and I'm drowning, right? As like a department of one, trying to, generally working other jobs that pay me, right? That's part of why I came up as a physical producer, because you can't really cut the line producer from the budget, but you can cut the producer fees, right? So, and that is wonderful work. And I'm so grateful I have that as my baseline, but it always takes away from your ability to be creative. Like right now I'm in prep on something, and there's like a script I'm dying to read. I've gotten 10 pages and now I have to reread it because and I'm the new mom. And so it's like to end my day and be like, yeah, let me just plow through a bunch of scripts and take them to, it's just insane. So like, how does anyone juggle that amount of stuff? Because it's become so volume focused, right? To even have an at bat. And even then it's 15x doors that then get slammed in your face. So how do you do that? How do you procure those projects when you are not financially wealthy, when you don't have a development deal? Like, how do you even construct that for yourself?
I think the first step in that is, you have to be able to start to focus on the long term. And I don't think it's just a question of long term and the immediate. There's then the intermediate, right? So I think of now, next, and later, right? Trying to organize my life essentially in those simple 3 boxes. But the later is a long-term pursuit. So the easiest way, because I'm most on top of it right now, is my newsletter, right? I have over 500 works in progress for my newsletter, right? So that's the later. And I have multiple ways of working on that. Essentially, I have the kind of essays that I write, which generally take me like 3 or 4 drafts, and I'll write them over 4 to 6 months. Work on it, come back to it, work on it, come back to it. And usually by the second draft, I'm posting it, but I'm posting it 2 or 3 months in advance, knowing I'll do some improvements.
Right.
And then I have lists, which sometimes become posts and sometimes are just the organizing principle for posts. And then I have of the moment sort of things. Doing the same thing with both original ideas, because I generate my own ideas too, and relationships with filmmakers and financiers, and then the projects. Like, the key to me to getting things made is knowing that you have a long period of time. Unfortunately, you don't get people's best work when they know they have a long period of time. So there's a kind of false urgency that the industry encourages that I don't know a way to dispense with it. So I'm going to seize the filmmaker on the new project. The filmmaker thinks they're going to be making the movie that year. I want nothing more than that to happen, but I want them to examine the project. And so invariably, when you start examining and trying to mine it for cinematic potential, things start to spark and they see it. The question of how to build for the long term, like a great example would be a movie I'm working with the director Crystal Moselle on. Excellent idea, first draft of a script. And we started unpacking, and it became clear that it wasn't a film that we were going to be able to go out in that quarter for financing or casting. And we worked probably for about 6 or 9 months to get it ready to go out for casting. And we did a round of casting, but it was clear that people didn't see the movie yet as viable to happen. And we were getting a lot of good, next wave breaking actors. Some of those people who wanted to be in the movie have since popped and become valuable, but they weren't then at that point in time. And in doing that, it became really clear that we needed another partner, that it would benefit from a woman being a producing partner on it. And so I started looking for other it was a more female driven story. So I started looking for folks, and I looked for folks who, would be additive to what we had. So whether they came from a line producing background, or that they came from a financing background, or something other than kind of the creative stewardship and business stewardship, that is kind of more what I've always done. And we found a great person who I collaborated with as a line producer, and still collaborate with as a line producer, but like yourself, was looking to try to develop. So I'm handling more of that, but they're right in the center of all the development and getting to see that. Along the way, the strikes happened, and Crystal was like, this is driving me mad. I so want to work. But the way she solved it was she and her partner decided to go away to Europe and improvise a movie for next to nothing, right? To do a micro budget film called The Black Sea. Which premiered at South by. They invented the idea, improvised the whole movie, and had it finished in 6 months.
Wow.
It's on the festival circuit now, coming out on November 22nd through Metrograph. Audiences love it. It's won a bunch of festivals. Super sweet, moving, unique, distinct, lively film. They call it kind of like a freestyle jam.
Nice.
But it totally works. And that changed the way that she thought about the movie that we had developed. So then she went back in and it's done the best work.
Yeah.
Right. Really exciting work to see. And, that process of making another movie in between for next to no money in a improvised format is not something that's really scalable for all development. It is a bespoke custom fit for that creative group. But it speaks of, I think, how you end up stacking your slate. Filmmakers teach me tricks every movie that I can apply to another movie with a different director in a different way. When I worked with Michel Gondry, he's, so brilliant, so unique in different ways. Some of his tricks could be used by Todd Solondz in a much different way. Like, no way those two people are alike, but you learn from them. And the same thing, I think, happens in a development process. The challenge, I think, is that all of us in the industry are so results driven, timeline driven, and trying to figure out the transactional nature of it that allows the film to get made, that we start to rush things out of what their cycles are. And it's a privilege to be able to keep things in those cycles of more organic development that's appropriate for that project and that filmmaker. It's a privilege to get to do that because you kind of have to know where your next job is already, how the income is going to come in. And so once you start to realize that, okay, I need to have a large slate that allows me to bring work to market on a regular basis, and I have to do a bespoke process that really allows the unique nature of each artist and each story to come to the surface. And I need to find a way to, since that is a open-ended time process that we don't know, I need to have other ways that start to keep me financially solvent. You start to realize I need to develop side hustles. Right? And side hustles can also be thought of different areas of expertise. And I think this is a really underdeveloped realm of the film industry, because we, again, like to think of everything as a one size fits all. And like, yes, it's a path to your success, but it really, I think, is often about where people's, unique passion, expertise, personality, and so on. And if we start to see that those are actually services that we can provide to each other, I think we start to see that there's a way to perhaps monetize those and allow us as producers to further improve our skill set and mastery, and at the same time find ways that allows for a different sort of collaboration. An example of this would be, festival strategy or distribution strategy. And I say that because right now I've been in the thick of it with the movie Invisible Nation that my wife directed and produced, and I produced, and Yvonne Orlick, Cassandra Jabola, Sylvia Fang, all produced. But we all had different sets that we could provide. I wasn't much involved in the production of it. Cassandra was. Sylvia was. I was much more involved in the ultimately distribution and festival strategy, although I watched every single cut and helped guide, since Vanessa and I are married, the kind of that is a 7-year process. So there's a lot of other forms of management that goes on all of that. But it became really clear to me that, particularly in the independent realm, where you're really driven, let's just say, by passion, right? Whether that's a aesthetic or a story or a subject or a cause or any of these sorts of things, you're not trying to fit it into the market, right?
Right.
You see with so much work, particularly in the documentary field, everyone thinks they have to do a crime or a celebrity or these sorts of things because they're told that's what people are buying. And that's what people are buying is very closely related to something else that I think plagues the industry, which is risk mitigation.
Yeah.
And both of those are about trying to make things for the right price that the market determines. And each of them, I think, leads you to put the artistic ambition of things on the side. Right. Because risk mitigation makes you plan everything out and you're then sticking to that plan. And as much as there's still a room for artistic ambition in it, so much of, I think, the creative process is almost spontaneous. It's those great moments that come along, the serendipity that you know how to exploit. And similarly, not all stories are fully birthed, onto the page or into the cut. And you have to be willing to kind of, flow to some degree. And that doesn't allow you to design it to sell, right? You have to hope that they will come, which is always a problematic scenario. But both of those speak of how hard it is for any time one person to effectively do it on their own, and the need for there to be outside voices that can provide guidance to pull ourselves out of the bubble. And to get back to what that tangent put me on is, I think those are often the great opportunities for side hustles and different forms of producer collaboration.
Yeah.
Like, we all need this. We all need to be able to share with our community, get to know other people, find different ways. That's a piece of collaboration. Everyone gets set, like when you go to a festival or a market, a meetup of some sort, people hope that they can sell you an idea that will make them get their movie made, get their career going. And they hope for that transaction, like upon meeting.
Right.
And I'm not going to buy anything from any salesperson I just met, although that's how they cleaned my windows recently, but so to speak. But I'm going to want to know, like, who this person is. How do we develop trust and confidence to collaborate in a way that isn't based just on prior accomplishment or experience, but on what we're both becoming, right? So that we can both reach something new. To how do you deliver? Like, I would love a cinema ecosystem that was about how do we deliver masterpieces? How do you make that start to work as a design? Because that's the outsized financial return. That's what the market hasn't predicted. That's the course corrector for everybody to say, like, get out of the rut of just making another low budget horror or another superhero thing or another Sydney Sweeney romance. Like, let's come up with something new. And the indie realm used to deliver that on a regular basis, but there's reasons why it can't.
Right, where it can't. And the way I look at it is the scouts for the studios. And I think it's so interesting to be in such a risk averse industry when so many of these greats, so many of these auteurs who have gone on to become the go-tos for studios even were huge risks that were taken at some point. Franchises become franchises because somebody had an original idea that did really well, and they go, well, let's make 12 more Star Wars, and then here we are, so creating these universes. But I'm wondering, like, with this moment in time that we're living in and the shifts that we've been obviously feeling in these last 5 years, how do we get back to that? I mean, there was an article yesterday on the Hollywood Reporter that was talking about why everyone in Hollywood feels stuck. And I thought it was interesting, the parallels that they made, because it says, the studios aren't really listening anymore to what audiences actually want, right? And the people that are in power have been in power for 30, 40 years. And a lot of those people got put there when they were in their late 20s, early 30s, when they had their finger on the pulse of what that generation wanted to see. And it's become this frustrating thing where the people of my generation and younger can't rise above this. They can't develop original stories. They can't actually take chances. So you just keep making the same thing. and remaking movies that nobody's asking to remake, and then getting upset when they don't do well and whatever. And it's interesting to see how, right? It's like, why are we even doing this? But you see how, like, you know, people in their 20s are rewatching The Office and Suits and these shows that you're like, some of the stuff is 20 years old. Like, why? What is that? And this idea that it's Hollywood has always been sort of a young person's game, right? In a way, like to have your finger on the pulse of taste and artistry. And like when you are starting in your career, you can have more flexibility to take those risks, right? There's less on the line than to be like in your 40s trying to make your first movie. There just is. So depending on what you want out of your life, if you have a family and all these other things. But I'm just trying to figure out, how do we get back to that? How do we, in a time when everyone's like, oh, TikTok is the future and the brains of this new generation, they'll never be able to sit still for more than 3 minutes. Like, how do we get back to narrative stories that really are what, as a society, as a species, have kept us truly going for so long? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
Well, I have a plan for that.
Okay. And how do we help you with this plan? Because I'm like, sign me up.
But I think, you know, part of the challenge is recognizing how hard it is to express what that plan is. That's the goal of my newsletter, Hope for Film, on Substack. And I had a clear idea when I launched. And I knew that there was this and this and this and this that I had to get people to catch up on. Right? You know, I joke that, you know, the greatest gift that Amazon gave me, getting, you know, to be in my 50s and hired to start their movie program, which was committed to theatrical release at the time, was I got a front row seat at the burning of everything I really ever loved, right? and the, you know, that's a pretty opportune thing to get to see. And you see how things could have been different, and you see why they went in the direction that they did. And you can see what are the necessary prerequisites to kind of get us back to something else. The squeezed or stuck, because I noticed they had an A and B headline. I got both. Why does everyone feel squeezed and why does everyone feel stuck in Hollywood? What's there is, look, those are basically everyone in their 60s, white men, you know, generally straight white men, Western. You know, you could say they got there first, and perhaps they never had quite a plan of succession that really was about remaining contemporary, because then the leadership suites wouldn't be filled with the same looking people.
Right.
There are many reasons why people, you know, hire folks who remind them of themselves. That takes a way to get through that. But I actually think you can often look at the system. If you look at it fully, you can see why the results are the results that we've gotten. And what has transpired over these last 30 years is, on one hand, media consolidation. On the other hand, a dominant system based on global streaming along the way. And then finally, what was once a series of numerous privately held companies has become one of a few publicly held companies. So those leaders who came of age 30 years ago only had to listen to themselves and their fellow board members. And now they listen to their shareholders and the stock traders along the way. And in any business, you know, people can use what their competitive advantages are. And the truth of those competitive advantages, what you're aiming for, is control. And the limited number of companies have a tremendous amount of control. It's ultimately not good for the business. And you can look at the way things used to be and say, how do we get back to that? And I think the easiest thing to look at is essentially anti-competitive business practices, antitrust actions, and why they are so needed. And there are good examples once we look outside of our own country and look elsewhere. First and foremost, you know, if you want to start stateside, you look at back in the days of the FinCEN decree for the networks. Back when we only had about 3 networks, you know, along the time, our government recognized that it was a distribution platform, those networks, and that they shouldn't be the same people who manufacture the content who distribute it for certain reasons because it doesn't create a fair market, a competitive market. And so they forbid those distribution platforms from broadcasting programs that they themselves manufactured in the prime viewing time. That was essentially what FinCEN said. They had to become from third-party suppliers. And it made people like Norman Lear, it made for like one of the greatest growths, golden age creatively and financially for television in America. Independents historically have proven that they will be more innovative and more cost effective and deliver a higher rate of quality on a consistent level than corporate processes. The corporate enterprise will always get stuck in what has worked before,
Right.
a reliance on comps and a kind of cover your ass, protect your job sort of way. You need to justify what you're doing. Saying, I love this isn't a way to justify it.
Right.
The independent is going to do it based around the passion, and they're going to take some wild swings. And sometimes that's how you get to the moon, right? And you see this repeated again in the UK. Their national broadcasters, they were required to license 25% of their content from third-party suppliers. And as a result, now over 3/4 of their shows are from third-party suppliers. They have numerous production entities as a result. And that's what we have to return to.
Yeah.
And the key when you look at it is recognizing that entertainment or culture, if you want to get pretentious, is a public good that everyone should have an equal access to engage with, but also in some ways to create. And that entities like the global streaming platforms are utilities to deliver that. And they need to be able to provide a significant portion of their attention, right, to third-party suppliers. I would also argue that that would be the best for their business, because the nature of audience acquisition is a lot like, you start to understand why do you need to deliver a regular cadence, right? Is because, and this is said, like I learned this when I worked in San Francisco running a startup boutique streamer, but it applies to everything, whether you're talking about brand building or you're talking about how to get recognized as a producer or as an artist or any of these things. It's like the formula for building an audience. And I think we should all like tattoo it on our sleeves so we can remember what it is, which is audiences are built by a regular cadence of supply at a consistent quality level in an environment that people trust and want to engage with, right? I'll say it again so everyone gets it. Audiences are built by a regular cadence of supply at a consistent quality in an environment that people trust and want to participate in.
So I have a quick question on that though, because as a Latina, there's so much money that is left on the table when it comes to our community, right? And we collectively, I speak for all the Latino community in Hollywood, who are so in admiration of what the Black community has been able to build in the Asian community and our counterparts. But consistently, no matter how much data we have and how much we know that the Latino population over indexes across the spectrum, they're the most diverse consumer base of any audience out there, yet this money is still being left on the table. Do you think that that's because the people in power continue to be these white men, to your point, that are disconnected from that? Or is it really more of a distribution issue, right? Because you can make great stories all day long that feature, or not necessarily feature, but have some kind of element of our culture in it, or not even necessarily, it doesn't have to be a Latino story or Latino content, which has become synonymous with low quality, right? Even the one Marvel movie we got that was a Latino character had like half the budget of any other Marvel movie, so we can't ever seem to win. But it almost feels like the name of the game is like, how do you find that audience in a world where it's oversaturated, where you are competing for eyeballs and eardrums across TikTok, and how do you find the people that are really going to resonate with that content? And when we look at, there was what felt like very intentional, but now does feel performative on behalf of the industry post the social uprising that we had at Black Lives Matter, of all the DEI, all the things that happened, right? And now how we've seen all of that just kind of go away in this moment of contraction and back to sort of fear and holding on and not taking risks. There's not really a question in there. It's more of a pontification of like, how do we get the powers that be to really start to care about that when everyone says the only color Hollywood cares about is green. Well, then why is this still the case in 2024, no matter how loud this fairly small amount of high powered Latinos that exist speak up? Like, how do, like, that is something that we have not been able to figure out how to like crack that, and really make the impact that I know is possible.
I think there's a lot of aspects that go into that.
Yeah, yeah.
And there are several things that give me tremendous hope that we are going to learn how to do things better and solve that and many other things. But they seem like negative statements when I first say them. And one of the very first of that is that the best and the brightest, the most powerful and well capitalized, will consistently make totally dumbass decisions. You can drop the whole list. That's like ignoring proven audience that has habitual behavior, goes to the theater way more than other people that is there. They will ignore that. And you can see it, like, again, like, let's look at all the money that big tech and the Hollywood adjacent tech invested in virtual reality, right? Meta, Apple, Microsoft just squandered a fortune, right?
Yeah.
Look at things like Quibi, squandered a fortune. Like all these sorts of things that happen time and time again. You can go back to VHS and Betamax, right? Like bad decisions along the way. And I would stack that up to the complete industry over focus on global streaming platforms, solely owned global streaming platforms. The fact that they do that is often where like the independent and outside voices, like those examples happen on a regular basis. Similarly, any closed ecosystem where the powers that be or the audience who participates in it already believe that it's good enough, there will never be investment into improving the product or the process because the perceived opportunity costs are too great. They already think it's good enough. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right? Like, let it go. But what happens over time is there's a deterioration of every step. We're frogs in the bath.
Yeah.
And we're actually soup for dinner. Right? Like, that will occur. And you can see that in some ways. And this is like a benefit I got at working at Amazon. That's one way to look at what Jeff Bezos did, right? He wasn't ever building an online bookstore. Books are wonderful because they fit together. They're easy to pack and they don't get damaged. What he was building and built was a series of operational improvements to the global fulfillment and distribution supply network. Right? You can't live without it, right? When I look at particularly independent film, but I would also say corporate film and Hollywood film and the global film industry, it's been 40 years of us doing the wrong thing. We've allowed all of the necessary operational improvements to the product and the process to wither and rust and decay. And there's a humongous opportunity there by just knitting a few of those things together, multiple entities knitting a few of those things together, and making the rest of the industry dependent on those things. And sometimes they're just common sense things that need to be done. The industry will always, in any industry, will always be efficient at trying to find the way to deliver the most revenue for the least results. That's what's happening in global streaming right now. When you move from a platform that has 50 million subscribers to one that has 300 million subscribers, and you've never built a system that is about delivering that regular cadence of supply, because you wouldn't be producing in-house if you were trying to do that. Producing requires producing for excellence, and that's the most inefficient process there is.
Right.
So you would farm that out to third-party suppliers to do that. But because they didn't opt for that, because they built all of the streamers are kind of built like traditional studios in a hyper inefficient manner, they then recognize that what they have to do is supply for the common audience, the film that is the low-hanging fruit, the thing that most people will like. And they learned that the internet is a wonderful behavior control mechanism to tune people's behavior. The user interfaces that we have, the algorithms that we use, the social media that we're saturated with, you can get people to easily click on something they actually don't have much interest in. They will just be driven by a few random elements, and they repeat that behavior, particularly when everyone around them is engaged in a similar behavior. Right? That wasn't the film business 30 or 40 years ago. That is a pretty efficient business, but it creates a mediocrity and devalues what the ultimate experience of engagement of watching a movie really is.
Right.
You know, and I think if we go back to that, like, why do you love movies? Everyone I know in the business got into movies because somehow it changed their lives, right? That we had that wonderful experience. And we have to recognize, like, wow, what a life changing act it is to sit in a room full of strangers and have a shared emotional response. You know, it's one of the reasons why horror films work so well, because you see the emotional response. Why comedy can work so well in a theater. But, you know, I kind of always felt my brand is closer to like, I make grown men cry. You know, like, how do you make things speak to us in a way that summons the things we don't normally speak about, right? We don't have enough of those types of experience. But certainly Manchester by the Sea was that type of experience, right? Those films still can work to take it back, right? So if you look at, on one hand, we have the dumbass decisions, we have the neglected operational improvements, and then I would say we've forgotten or ignored how to speak secret languages. And like, not to get too woohooey on that, but I think that every film has in it, and particularly if you have a creative team that's trying to drive these things through, many things that, quote, speak to us that we don't necessarily track and land in terms of Hollywood parlance, right? You know, that executives all about like clarifying intent and landing these transformative moments of character or plot along the way. I'm sorry, that's math, right?
Right.
And that's not emotional engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other things that we can work with that allows an audience member to watch a movie and feel seen and heard, right? And that is where people start to kind of electrify, wake up, connect, care deeply, passionately about a movie in a way that spoke to them, that transformed their lives. And we've neglected that part of the process when we start to only think about audience acquisition and engagement and efficiency. And I think that those secret languages also are specifically, on one hand, and there's like a flywheel windfall that you get from this, both about cultural identity, right? That we see those things that connect us, but they also, the more specific you get into those, it blossoms into universality, right? You know, so movies, like, I'll go back from myself, like when we made Ang Lee's Wedding Banquet, that film worked everywhere in the world. And it worked because it was specific enough to a culture and identity, or multiple cultures and identity at that moment in time, that people could see themselves even when it was beyond those boundaries. And a more recent example would be Past Lives, right? Which I think worked in that same sort of way. I really believe the tighter that film is into its own subject's cultural identity, the more universal it becomes. And I really worry about the approach that the global streaming platforms have to global cinema, is not to go in that direction, right? Even though they'll tell you that they care about local audiences, but they think about what they think helps things travel.
Right.
And I would say what helps things travel is the ability to express secret languages, not to try to do like, oh, this is where we need to rise in the drama, and then like the conflict and the resolution. And that's cultural imperialism in my mind.
And I think that's where the word content comes in, and why we're so like averse and give so many of us like hives just to say it, because to me content becomes just ubiquitous and it's just fluff. It's like, especially in the days of, you can just stream, binge watch a show, and within 8 hours you've consumed years of someone's thoughts and hopes and dreams, versus before you would watch a movie once, it wasn't alright, you couldn't just go to YouTube and find a clip. You had to wait and rent it again. There was just like a a clamoring for something, that you consumed things in a way that just resonated a lot more deeply. And I still believe that, like, again, the audiences that care about that are going to find that. But I guess my concern is with new generations coming up who are not going to get to necessarily experience the same impact that we had coming up with films and stories. How are they gonna like find themselves reflected in story and on screens and be guided? Because that's what stories do, right? They help us navigate ourselves and make sense of the world and our own experiences. At best, not every film needs to do that. It's perfectly fine to just be entertained too. That's great, but that's what I think a lot about, is how do we in this big moment of opportunity, because it really is, create a new version of this industry that can somehow stitch together all of that. And I find it so fascinating for such a risk averse industry who doesn't learn the lessons of the past, in terms of the big mistakes that you're talking about, and say, okay, how do we take all of these things we know, these mistakes that we've made, and how do we make sure that we're not leaving money on the table, that we are, touching all touch points of it? Because otherwise, I think we're, closer to becoming those fat people in Wall-E, who are just like floating in chairs and just like drinking soda and just completely like deadpan inside. And I think that's collectively my biggest concern, is if we become desensitized to our humanity, which is what stories give us, right? What impact does that have on a bigger scale? So I would say it's almost like a mental health crisis, right?
They are corresponding at the same time, right?
Exactly, because you see how much with the internet and how it connects us, but how many people, young men especially, feel so disconnected. There's a loneliness epidemic post the pandemic, and you would think, well, we have the internet, we have so much content, we have so much to connect us, yet so many people don't feel themselves seen. So it's like a plea, a cry for help, that stories need to be told. Filmmakers need to continue to tell their stories, but to your point, through that lens. And I think a lot of people want to, and they are hungry for it. But the issue of sustainability is, I think, what's keeping a lot of people at bay, and is what's preventing new voices from entering the industry, and the ones that have been here for 20 years trying their best to eventually throw their hands up and go, well, what's the point?
The answer is in exactly what you said, right? So you identified a mental health crisis. You identified a loneliness epidemic. You spoke of, in some ways, cultural polarization. And we spoke of the calcification of the leadership class in our cultural industry, right? But what we're giving voice to, all of it's around, is a cultural crisis, right? Which I think is also directly related to an economic model, right? And over these 40 years, we've reduced it down to really the global streaming model and the blockbuster theatrical model in our industry. The cultural crisis remains one of diversity and focus, where we need the widest range of perspectives. And that can only happen when we have a diversity of economic models, right? And what we've allowed happen is this consolidation, which diminished the number of revenue streams and diminished the entry opportunities for new participants. And so, if we were to address the cultural crisis, we would have to address it through bringing in different economic models. For instance, one of the times that people get to be the most experimental, take the biggest risk, is when they've come off of a surprise hit, right? And they can make new plans. We wouldn't have Sundance, if Robert Redford didn't get to make a lot of money doing some things that kind of defined a era, right? Not many people have done what Robert Redford has. Perhaps Ava DuVernay has done what Robert Redford has, and also coming at a unique cultural moment, was able to parlay some success into really groundbreaking strategies to open up who gets to see movies and what types of movies get to be seen. But we have to do this, I think, now on a national and global level. We need other countries to actually work to preserve their culture from this global threat. And we have to do it amongst the wide ranges of populations within our borders and country here too. And the clearest thing is just the difference of being an independent producer 30 years ago and today. One of the things I've always loved about movies is I know I can get my movie made because I had a wide variety of financing opportunities and models to choose from, as opposed to television, which historically, particularly before the cable explosion and then the streaming explosion, had only a few places to go. You know, you got maybe to develop a pilot, but if they didn't go to the pilot, there weren't any more doors to knock on.
Hmm.
I've always had 200 doors, right? Because the competitive advantage that the global streamers had, because of the free money that was kind of granted to, if you were a corporate entity, to borrow money, you know, at that point in time, they were able to outpay anybody in any territory whatsoever for the most likely prospects
Hmm.
of success. And I got to play in that game, you know, at that moment in time, and they outpriced the small business practitioners in every territory, call them exhibitors or call them distributors or call them producers, got outpriced by the likely successes, right? Your neighborhood theater is still dependent on 2 or 3 hits each year to stay afloat. Not just their wonderful curation that brings things, but they needed these hits and they couldn't always get those hits, right? And
Hmm.
then they couldn't get them at all because of the nature of streaming. Once streaming in its model also deprived the creator class from sharing in success based bonuses,
Hmm.
that opportunity for wild speculation, for experimentation also went out the window. It should be a crime that somebody can give away their future profits or even future data from the work that they've generated. In the same way as we can't sell ourselves into indentured servitude, we shouldn't be able to sell away or even be led to sell away our future profits. We need to get paid in success. And without that, free enterprise, independence, small businesses can't ever experiment in that way to say, oh, I want to address my community, or I want to address my passion project, or I want to do something in a different way because I feel that it works. We've taken that away under this current structure. You know, we have to recognize that without a wide opportunity of economic models, without success based bonuses, we won't be able to develop the widest array of perspectives and culture that allow us to find those things that sometimes get us out of the rut and back on track of giving the people what they truly want. Right now, people have to learn to like what they get because they won't get what they like.
Right. But it's that trickle down idea of, if it's what the shareholders want, then we just have to force feed whatever the shareholders want. And again, we just come back to like the few people holding the power, which is the tale as old as time. But I think it's like if you're a filmmaker or you're a producer nowadays, if you're a person in your 20s coming up, what would compel you to stay this course, to stay this path, to be the future of our industry, to be the bastions of protecting culture, especially on the heels of AI, which I want to talk a little bit about. It's like, of course, a huge issue, a whole other episode. But somebody sent me a link to a conference that happened yesterday where a CEO of one of the many AI companies was predicting that in the next 20 years, there'll be 10x, 20x content produced because of generative AI and the access that'll give people. In a way, is that good for artists, right? Because it gives a lot more access for a relatively low sort of barrier to entry, but certainly bad for business. Is there a version where AI could somehow be partly responsible for helping these cultural movements and protections?
Okay, so the two questions there you
Yeah.
got there. Like first, like you're a young person or someone that hasn't been, found their path quite yet in the industry. What's going to give you hope to keep on,
Yeah.
when it feels so unsustainable? First of all, like, I'll go back for how I decided to work in the film business. I was always a film fanatic. I got both from my mom and then my school. I got access to cinema in a way other people didn't. And I really believed in its world changing capabilities. But I didn't know anyone in the film business. I thought it'd be self indulgent to go in there. I had to be more practical. And I didn't think I would ever get in the film business. And when I first started working for myself, I was doing community organizing and on the road. I'm a 19-year-old college dropout, and I'm on the road going to places I don't know anybody else. Incredibly lonely sort of thing. And I was working 100-hour weeks. And I would go into the movie theater to unwind. That was how I unwound, right? Probably should have gone to the gym. Not sure they had gyms yet everywhere, but I went to the movie theater and I hated the films of the early 80s when I was that age. And it would just make me angry And I kind of like that, right? That feeling. And it was like, I can do this better. I know what I want. And for me, it was right around the same time as punk rock was kicking in. And that came with it a kind of DIY, really, pro democracy element in it. And I was like, you know, there's got to be something in film that's the equivalent of this punk rock thing. And I saw the French New Wave and how they worked with economy of means, a cinema of poverty, and pushed a new aesthetic. I was like, yeah, that can be happening here. And home video was just kicking into gear. And I arrived in New York City the year of Spike Lee, Susan Seidelman, Jim Jarmusch, and the Coen brothers.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's it. And we can do it even cheaper. That was really how we kind of got into it. But it started with like that kind of anger. And it's like, don't you dare tell me what the fuck to do. Like, I'm going to do my own thing. And I think if you're a young person who is creative and in the arts, how can you not feel that right now in that same sort of way? And then the tools of every aspect, not just creation, but also distribution, are so much better. And I look at something like Substack, and I'm kind of amazed that we're not in revolt to have the same thing in the film world. But the truth is, Substack is also a film delivery platform. It is a video delivery platform. It is an image delivery. It's not just text. Like, it's wrong to consider it a newsletter when it's media rich, right? Where you get full data and real time payments. I get paid every single day by my Substack. I see every new user and I'm in direct communication with them. And you can have that now. And if somebody that understands how to use that well, because I'm an old guy who's tough to teach new tricks, I don't, but someone that does, you can unlock that. And I think that for a generative artist of distinction, of some, not excellence, but distinction, you're going to be making between $50,000 and $100,000 if you're doing that well right now. And if you're working, as we talked about, in collaboration with others, you start to get a flywheel effect going. And that becomes, it is both a way to support and market your own other work, the other revenue driving work, other creative expression that you have, but it also is a creative outlet unto itself. And I think you're asking us to make a type of content that we don't care about anymore. We have the tools to make it exactly as we want. We have the tools to help us build our own audience and engage with the audience and reward our audience and facilitate trust and confidence. We can do it, right? We can do it. That, to me, is incredibly inspiring. And I think that next wave of artist entrepreneur using such tools, and the next gen tools to come after that, and the next gen tools to come after that, will be transformative for our industry. We're still like, it always amazed me at a place like Amazon, the people who are doing all of the digital ads or the social media outreach and that were often my age. And I was like, none of these people are digital natives that grew up on it. You are messing it up by who you have running it. So I see like a takeover inevitably. The same thing I think happens with AI. In the same way, I think we can look now and say that both social media and streaming, or perhaps Trojan horses that seemed like wonderful things that delivered something else. I'd certainly gain from each of them, but I think our culture and industry has been hurt by each of them. I think AI can do the same thing. I would certainly advise anybody, entering the field to be dabbling with it as part of their practice on a regular basis. That said, I think the policy of whether it's of saturation supply, whether that's in marketing or content or anything, has a deadening effect on the audience. And I think it's really hard to escape the kind of sameness and thus the pull to mediocrity that brings. I guess after find good collaborators, if I had to give somebody starting out in the business like advice that I can't do enough myself, it would be let your freak flag fly. like be your authentic oddball self, right? Because the AI is not going to map that. And I think the more that we're willing to examine ourselves and expose ourselves, trust ourselves, in an authentic fashion, we find connection. The greatest gift I had in my own professional career was probably deciding that I had to stop worrying what other people thought about me, and it allowed me to do more things and feel comfortable doing it. But it was really hard to get to that spot.
Yeah.
I think that is the difference of humans and machines. And I think in this new era where all that's going on, you want to learn how to use the tools to show your distinction, your humanity in every which way.
Yeah.
So I think that in the midst of these things coming online and influencing our processes of how to do things, it's really important to not lose the first principle of connection with others, the human side.
I love it. Well, thank you for this.
That was pretty good. I felt pretty good on it.
Yeah, no, this is a great conversation. I wish we had a lot more time, but maybe we can do another part.
Exactly.
Continue the conversation. Okay, so this is just a fun lightning round I like to do with all guests just to kind of close this out. What's a song that teleports you to a happy place?
Like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan.
What is the latest piece of art that has moved you? Book, a film, could be anything.
I have on the wall here opposite you a drawing by Bill Horberg, a producer of many great films and an executive. It is about Chicago and Buddy Guy and music, which I like a lot. But it's also the fact that Bill is a producer who loves to draw.
Huh.
He also loves, he plays jazz, loves to do that. And I often think about, like, I'm pretty one-dimensional in that I'm obsessed with movies.
Yeah.
And I wish that I had spent periods of my life not losing track of the other things that I love. I read a lot. I listen to a lot of music. I love the outdoors. All those things are there. I like to cook. But, like, I wish I had deep passions with output beyond cinema.
Yeah.
So to me, like, that question of art is also related often to process.
Fill in the blank. When I'm overworked, blank helps ease the stress.
I think a long walk is always the best.
Final question. What is one of the most worthwhile investments you have ever made? And it doesn't have to be financial.
I think the most worthwhile investment I've ever made in my life is therapy in many different ways. Like, it helps my relationships. It helps my creative process. It's helped my storytelling abilities. And it's helped me do what I most enjoy, which is examine the big picture for all of the components. And I couldn't do that by myself.
This has been a delight. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your wisdom, of course, with me and the listeners. It's why we do this is to, producing anything in our industry can feel quite lonely, but it's a reminder that we're not alone in our pursuits, especially right now. So thank you. I really appreciate it.